And hello! So in this video we're going to start looking at the fun-filled world of dynamics. Yay! So what I'm going to do is I am going to create a polygon plane. So a couple of things to keep in mind when we're dealing with dynamics. Basically, we need a lot of edges. And let me show you in my awesome Photoshop skills exactly what happens when you turn something into an N object. And this will make it where it'll be pretty easy for you to understand. And don't make fun of my Photoshop skills. There we go. So basically, what we're dealing with is think about all of the verts you have on a polygon object. Right now, you're used to dealing with verts, edges, and planes, and that's basically what a polygon is. It's all the verts connected up, makes a solid object. Basically, what happens when you turn it into an N object is think about everything in terms of springs. Basically, it makes each little vert its own world and connects them all up with springs. And that's basically how it makes it, where it can have the bending qualities and the flowing qualities, and makes it into a dynamic thing that can actually change shape and all that. This will help too with the settings when we start looking at N objects, because it has things like stretch, compression, bend resistance, how well can it bend. If you think about all these things in terms of it being springs, they start to make a lot more sense. And let me sign my awesome artwork here and it'll be worth $1 billion. Yay! So that's basically what you need to keep in mind is it's going to take all those verts and connect them all up with springs. So you really want to have a lot of those verts, a lot of that edge flow when you're dealing with nCloths. So you want to make sure your object has a lot of verts. So how do we make it into an N object? Well, it's actually pretty easy. If I go into FX, and I go into nCloth, create nCloth, yay! It's got its own button. Click. Oops, if I select it first, boom! You are now nCloth. So if I hit play, it's going to fall. It now is being affected by gravity. Pretty cool, huh? So that's how you start to set up nCloth. So I'm also going to look at what was made over here now. So we still have our polygon plane, and now it has the nCloth attached to it, and it also made this guy called the nucleus. Now the nucleus is what runs all the dynamic properties inside of Maya. So if I go into its attributes, we can start to see how we can affect that nCloth. This is kind of like the global settings. This is what's going to control all that nCloth goodness. So if we look here, we have gravity and wind. Gravity 9.8 feet per second, that's what it is here on Earth, and it's going down in Y. So we can actually kind of play God here and say, oh, invert gravity. So now it'll float up. Yay! Remember, you must make sound effects in Maya, you will go nuts. But you can also, it also has wind. So I could actually give this some wind here. Maybe get a little bit of noise in the wind. And now when I hit play, you can see how it starts to have that wind blowing it. Ho, ho, ho. Very slick, huh? So this is kind of like I said, the global settings for the nCloth. How much gravity is there going to be? How much wind is there? Things like that. Also down here we have our solver attributes. Now this is a big part of how Maya defines things. So if one thing you want to make sure of in your timeline here is you want to have your playback speed set to play every frame. You don't want to play real time because that skips frames. The one thing about Maya when it's doing dynamics, it has to know where you're at, where you've been, and where you're going. So it needs every single frame being played. That's why you can't scrub the timeline for dynamics. It actually tell you down here, nucleus evaluation skipped, frame change too large. Because I skipped so many frames, Maya doesn't know what to do. Now the solver attributes is how Maya calculates the nCloth. And it really comes into effect when you have something that it's going to interact with. So if I'm going to go ahead and create a polygon sphere, and then to make nCloth interact with things, you need to make it into a passive collider. You can make any object into a passive collider. Click that. So now this is a passive collider. Now if I hit play, you'll see that it now interacts with that object. Now we're going to get into how it interacts in the next video, but I want to finish up with the nucleus here and this solver attributes. Now basically what happens is every single time you hit play, Maya is going to check 3 times per frame if the nCloth is interacting with anything. That's why dynamics can start to eat up your memory and things like that. Every single frame it's checking its work 3 times. That's what the substeps are. Max collision iterations is how many more times it checks its work after it's detected a collision. So as this falls, Maya's checking every single vert to see if it's colliding with everything 3 times per frame. As soon as it hits something, it makes a collision. Now it's going to check its work 4 more times. So now you're up to 7 times per frame it's checking all that. So sometimes when you have an issue with it not colliding correctly, you can kick up the substeps a couple or the max collision iterations. Don't, for the love of God, do that or your computer will fart at you. And don't, for the love of God, do that. Your computer will fart at you. So just kind of keep that in mind. You usually don't have to mess with this much, especially on simple objects. But once you get into more complex objects, this sometimes comes into effect. So basically with the nucleus, you have your solver attributes and you have your gravity and wind. Now you can get into time attributes and things like that, but we're going to look at that down the road. These are seldom used, but it can be used. But basically, that nucleus is controlling how the object's going to fall, if it has wind, and how it collides with other objects. Cool, cool.